Hi guys, and welcome to our second lesson for online learning on the famine. So yesterday you did some great work looking at the context of the famine, looking at what the world in Ireland was like in the early 1800s. Today we're going to be looking at the events that led up to the actual famine itself in a bit more detail. Okay, so yesterday one of the things I asked you to do was to go onto Menthe and give me some responses to this picture that you see now in front of you again. And we've got some great responses here. So words that came up multiple times. Obviously, poor here is the biggest word in the middle. You'll also see if you look around a few more times that poor, as we mentioned, so poor family. They are a poor family, and it's definitely a great thing to notice here is that there's a huge amount of poverty. Okay. We see that in the small house, which is also mentioned a number of times here, and a very basic way in which the house is built. Okay, we can see that the clothing that they're wearing maybe isn't in the best condition. We can see that the plot of land they're on is very small. There's a lot of mud around. So the poverty is a great thing to be noticing here. Okay, the word worried also came up a number of times. So well done to anyone who said the word worried. I think that's a great word to use here. It really shows the emotions of the time and how worried these people were, how difficult the situation was, that they just couldn't get past this. There was nothing they could do other than be worried and be concerned for their family. All right, and that is then again because you see, as many people have said, the potatoes have gone bad. Some people said the potatoes are great, potatoes have gone bad. It came up a number of times and connected then obviously to the word hungry, which we see as well. So well done again. We can definitely see the cause of the potato blight and the effect of potato blight on these people. So some other great words in here: struggling, run down. Big family came up a number of times, and yeah, at that time we definitely had huge families. We see sick family there, so yes, there is sickness. We see starving and hunger. Hovel came up, so well done. I think someone probably remembered that from when we looked at the documentary before Christmas. We have destitute, we have sadness, we have concern. Great response here, to this picture. I think this picture is a really good example of the art that illustrates what went on in the famine. But well done, really impressed with the response here. He did really well and picked out all of the main points for us looking at the famine. So today's objectives, what I want to do is have a good awareness of the causes of famine, and then I want to be able to empathize. So historical empathy is one of our key skills in history. So I want to ask you to try and empathize with people, the courtiers living in the pre-famine times and then leading up to the famine. The more we can understand of these people, the more we can understand why the famine happened and the terrible effects of the famine on these people. So first thing today is looking at the causes of the Great Hunger. Now you see here there are 4 causes laid out on this diagram, on this graph, sorry, and this graph is also in the booklet, so the famine booklet that you have on Teams. You can also find this graph in there. So I'll go through each of them in turn. So the first cause we have here is the steep rise in population. Now we've talked about this before. We talked about this when we looked at 1798, and I think we mentioned it as well when we were looking at Daniel O'Connell. Okay, and because we were looking at how he wanted Catholic emancipation and the rights for all these poor Catholic people who were living around Ireland. The steep rise in population is something that's been going on for quite a while. So if we look at this graph that's coming up now, you can see that from 1700 pretty much the whole way through to 1850, the population of Ireland is rising and rising quite rapidly, especially from about 1770 up to 1850. You see that steep incline there. So that from 1700, when the population was just over 2 million people, by 1850 we've reached 8.2 million people on the island. Now that is absolutely massive, huge number of people, huge growth. Okay, so the population is growing quite significantly. Now, why is this a problem? Well, how does it cause famine? Right? The population of Ireland is growing at the moment, but we're not worried about famine. The reason that this is causing famine is because the country is not industrializing, it's not developing in the way it needs to at the time that the population is growing. So the population is getting bigger, but they're not producing the amount of food they need in order to feed the people, or at least they're not being allowed to keep that food within the country. So while there is enough food being produced, the population is also rising in number in other countries around the world. And the food that's being produced in Ireland, although there's enough for the people of Ireland, it's been taken away and sent to people elsewhere. So this sharp rise in population means that Irish people are reliant on a smaller portion of food that's being produced. Okay, the food that's available to them is not increasing at the rate the population is increasing, and because they had to pay rent, and the rent was paid through crops, most of the food that they were eating was potatoes, and so they became very, very reliant on this, which we'll talk about again in a second. The population growing then also links into our second cause for the famine. That's the subdivision of land. So again, we have mentioned this before. And subdivision of land refers to how when a father had, because all the land tended to be in the male line in families at the time, not always, but most of the time, when a father died or when a father became old and wanted to pass on his land, in subdivision, what he would do is he would pass an equal share onto each of his sons. So you see here that we have one farmer at the top, so this is, say, the grandfather. He has 3 sons, and each of them gets a small 1/3 of his land, gets one section of his land, which is all well and good. Maybe he had a lot of land and he had enough to give each of his sons. But when each of those sons has their own family, we can see below they have 3 or 4 sons each. We now have up to 11. We now just here in this one alone, we have 11 people, 11 sons that the land is now being divided between. So we've taken one plot of land that one person was living off, and within 2 generations, there's now 11 families trying to live off this, which obviously is going to cause a problem, because while the farmer at the top was getting on fine with the amount of land he had, his grandchildren have much, much less land to grow their crops, to grow their food, and keep their family on. Right? Now, this is not an issue in terms of the amount of land in the country, rather the amount of land actually available to the cottiers, to the poorest people. Okay? And then if we go another generation below that, we're going to see that the land divided up even further. And this is a very, very simple version. And if you remember that Irish families at the time could have been very, very large. So while here we're saying, oh, they're divided between 3 people, it could have been divided between 6 or 7 sons. So we could have had a very, very quick, rapid lowering the amount of land available to families. Okay, so subdivision means that while the population grows, each family has less land available to them in order to grow their food. So essentially what we end up with is a system where the people are totally reliant on a single crop. So this is the third cause. So all of these you see are linking together. And the crop that they became totally dependent on was the potato. The reason for this is that most of the time when these people were working, they were working in order to grow crops for the landlord or for the tenant farmers in order to pay their rent. This is how they paid rent. They grew crops. The crops they had to grow, things like wheat and barley and corn, took a lot of time. It took a lot of time and a lot of effort to grow these crops for the landlord. And they didn't really have much of a choice. They weren't able to say, oh, we want to grow something else. The landlord or the tenant farmer, whoever's in charge, is saying, this is what we're growing. You have to work on the land and help me to grow this, or grow this for me. So they're out there and they're growing these crops, and this is where they're spending the vast majority of the time. And it's a lot of hard labor, a lot of very difficult work. But they don't get any food from this. All it's doing is paying the rent, which means when they come home, they need to have an easy supply of food. And for these people, potatoes were a very, very easy supply of food because potatoes don't need a lot of care. Potatoes grow very well by themselves. You plant them, you do have to spend time planting them, digging out furrows. But once they're planted, you leave them, they produce a high amount of nutritious crop, a very, very good food source for relatively little effort. So while these people were out spending most of their time paying their rent, when they came home, it was much easier to produce their own food that they would then live off. And this went to such an extent that people were essentially, in the years before the famine, eating nothing other than potatoes. And I mean nothing. Okay? The typical male cottier's diet at the time, when they wake up in the morning for their breakfast, they would have potatoes, maybe up to 2 kilos of potatoes, a huge amount. Right? If they're lucky, they might be able to put some milk on their potatoes, but a lot of the time it's just plain potatoes with water. Then they go out to work, they have lunch. Again, lunch is potatoes. Another 2 kilos of potatoes for lunch, which it's boring food, definitely. We can definitely say it's not the most varied diet, but potatoes are very nutritious and they have a lot of calories and a lot of energy, and they really are very, very good for us. Right? So they're able to get their energy from them, and they're to become totally reliant on it. If the potato is going well, if it's a good season, they may have enough that they can eat potatoes again for dinner. Whereas if it's a difficult season, they may have to go a bit hungry in the evening. Right? They may come home and not be able to eat anything. Now, a lot of the cottiers may have had a small amount of livestock as well, so they may have had a pig or some chickens. Right? The tenant farmers may have had 1 or 2 cows, things like that, which could also add into their food supply. Obviously, cows, goats, sheep all produce milk, which we can drink, so they would use that to mix with their potatoes. Right? But the problem is that obviously animals only produce meat when we slaughter them. And so once you've used an animal for meat, you don't have that animal anymore. Okay? So they very much they rely on animals for milk a lot more so than they would rely on them for meat. But over time, every once in a while, the lucky tenant farmer or cottier may be able to have a bit of meat with their diet, but it's not usual. Basically, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, they're eating meat, possibly they're eating potatoes, possibly with a little bit of milk. And that is all they're eating. So they're totally dependent on this, which is a big issue when the fourth cause, the potato blight, comes along. And the potato blight takes their beautiful, healthy potatoes, which we see here, and turns them into these rotten husks. And now you can see this potato is not going to provide you with any nutrition. You're not going to be able to eat this. Right? It's not a good foodstuff. So when this disease comes and it turns the potatoes into this rotten husk, there is simply no food left. Now, when we look at the course of the famine in the next lesson, we'll notice that yes, some people did have animals, and yes, they did slaughter the animals, and that provided food for a small amount of time. The issue is the potato blight keeps coming back. It's not going away. And after a few years, you have no more animals left. All you have, the only thing you're able to grow are these husks, these terrible, disgusting potatoes, which are simply inedible. There's and this is not because of taste, this is because they just can't be eaten. And if they are eaten, there's nothing there to eat. There is nothing to them. Okay, so that's the 4 causes we have of the famine. We have the steep rise in population, which we've talked about multiple times, that rise in population from 1700 the whole way up to 1845. We have the subdivision of land, that people are living on smaller plots of land. We have a dependence on a single crop, the potato being the only thing. And then, of course, we have the potato blight coming and destroying that single crop. So all these causes are very much connected. So what I want to ask you to do now is to pause, and I want a 2 to 3 sentence summary of how this issue, for each of these. So 2 to 3 sentences about the rise in population and how that was a cause of the famine. 2 to 3 sentences about the subdivision of land and how that caused the famine. 2 to 3 sentences about dependence on the crop, and 2 to 3 sentences on the potato blight. Okay, so you can use the information I'm just after giving to you in this video. You can also use the information available in the booklet, but it's important to put this into your own words. It'll help with your understanding. Okay, so I'm going to suggest you pause now and complete that task. Excellent, well done. So that is the main part of our lesson for today, of the speaking for the lessons for today done. Okay, we've looked at all of the different causes. But I said at the start, one of the things we were going to do today was try to develop some historical empathy. And this is one of our key skills as historians. We can think about people and feel what they feel. And that's what task 2 is going to be about. So task 2 is a bit more creative, and it's looking for you to think about what the lives of the cottiers were like. Okay, so what I'm looking for you to do is to write 2 diary entries of a person living as a cottier in pre-famine Ireland. So this is in the years just before the famine, say 1840 to 1844, sometime around then. And I want you to tell me, if you imagine you're a cottier living at a time, in your diary I want you to tell me about your work. So today I went out to work. What are you doing for your work? What do you do every day? What food are you having? What is your home like? And you can see some of the pictures here around the screen of the work and the homes. Okay? Describe what your house is like. Describe who you live with. We've talked about this before. Okay? We have this in the booklet, so make sure you look at it. Your families. Okay? How many people are you living with? Who is in your family? Have all of these people survived? Have you had some losses in your family? Is that normal? Tell me about the landlords and the tenant farmers. Okay? Are they above you? Are they coming after you for rent? Okay? And this is the task that I then want submitted on Teams. Okay, so I want you to spend a good 15 to 20 minutes on this task. I want a good bit of work done on this task, and then you're going to take a picture of it and submit to me on Teams so that I can see this work when you have completed it. Okay, so that's the main task for today. So everything here was okay. If you have any questions about the causes of the famine, please do get in contact with me. You all by email or by the team page. All right, and good luck with the work, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow.